2017 began with some big news for French workers. A new law dubbed the Right to Disconnect Law says that French employers will have to specify certain hours when workers will not have to respond to or even check their work email. The French government says the law will ensure the respect of rest time and vacation, as well as personal and family life. Organizations with over 50 workers must comply with the law. Companies are required to specifically document and publish the hours when their employees will not answer or check email. This is likely to apply to an evening, weekend, holiday, or vacation time. In this report, attorney and technologist Peter Vogel discusses this groundbreaking new law and its impact on workers and enterprises alike. We'll also hear why not everyone thinks that the right to disconnect is such a great idea. There are several teaching points in this program. First, we'll share some background on France's right to disconnect law. Then, we'll discuss if it would ever be possible to have a similar law here in the U.S. Next, how some companies are relying on technology to help them comply with the French right to disconnect law. And finally, some best practices for after-hours and vacation communication with employees. Now, let's begin our report. Most workers, at least here in the U.S., would agree that the workday no longer ends at 5 o'clock when the whistle blows. Those days are long gone. The advent of the internet, mobile technologies, and email have long ago put that concept to bed. Instead, we're always plugged in, wired up, and ready to respond to the latest work communication as soon as it hits our device, no matter the date or time. The country of France has produced a bit of a game-changing effort to reverse the 24/7 workday with its new Right to Disconnect law. Now, workers have been given the right to unplug, log off, or shut down without fear of retribution from the boss. Interview guest Peter Vogel, a technologist and attorney, offered his take on the law and what led up to it.
What has happened historically is that there's been a huge problem in communities around the world, not just France. France just is the first one to enact a law where employees would say, well, wait a minute, if you expect me to work late at night, you should pay me late at night. As a matter of fact, the police in Chicago filed a lawsuit against the city of Chicago saying that they should get overtime pay for having to respond to text messages and emails in the evening. So this has been going on for quite a while about people wanting to have some privacy and not have to be connected 24/7.
So what issues were the French trying to address by passing the Right to Disconnect law? Were citizens actually complaining, as they did in Chicago, about after-hours and vacation emails? Vogel explains.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they would like to know that they can actually turn off their devices, their phones and their tablets, and not be expected to respond all day long. And I think there's an interesting social issue associated with it that I think not really law, it's a societal demand that people be able to have a more casual evening, so to speak. And if you think about it, that different countries around the world have different expectations. When you're in Spain, for instance, siestas in the afternoon are a very common part of the culture. Also in Europe, unlike the United States, essentially, if you want to conduct any business in the month of August, forget it. The EU goes on vacation in August. And so I think a lot of it has to do with what is society trying to allow its citizens to do, what's important to them. And I think we are now so dependent on emails and communicating with others by text messages or whatever 24/7 that we are just plugged in all the time.
On the surface, the Right to Disconnect law seems like a great deal for workers. But if you look beneath the surface, there are a few complications. For example, what if you're part of an international organization with colleagues, business partners, or customers scattered across the world? How does the law impact communication, including email, texting, and voice in those cases? In addition, email is likely to pile up on off hours, thereby requiring large blocks of time out of the workday in order to catch up. Peter Vogel commented on why the disconnect law may not work for him.
We're going to see how this plays out. I mean, it's a little soon. It went into effect on January 1st, 2017. I'm not aware of any other country to do this. They may be setting the path down a new road that we're just not familiar with, but it's a very unusual circumstance where a company would negotiate when people do not have to work. Now, it's not necessarily good for the business. It could be have very adverse impact because I know that on a personal level, I get up at 3 or 4 in the morning every day and work because that is my best time of day for my brain. And I learned this years ago. It was a very interesting study that the American Bar Association was doing about how you go about making the best use of your time. And what I learned was that you should take whatever your best brain time is and do that, use that time productively. So for instance, like I say, between 3 in the morning and about 8 is my best brain time. And what I've done over the years is I normally do not make appointments to see anybody in the morning. I will only see people in the afternoon. And what I found was the first month after I kind of adopted this new strategy, my billings went up by 30% because I was more productive, because I had control. So I think that one of the problems we have with these hours when somebody would work is, what is somebody's best brain time? I have a lot of really close friends. Their best brain time is between 11 at night and 3 in the morning. But the rest of the day, not so much. And so I think having rigid time zones is maybe not going to work out so well.
How stressful is nonstop work-related communication? According to a report by National Public Radio, the University of British Columbia found that survey participants who checked email 3 times a day were less stressed than those who checked nonstop. Another study attributed to Colorado State University showed that even anticipating the arrival of email in the evening could have a negative effect on a person's well-being. So, the facts and a wealth of data exist to back up France's right to disconnect effort. We asked our guest expert if he's heard any rumblings that a similar law might ever be enacted here in the U.S.
I have not heard of anything in the United States, but I think one of the issues at play that makes this very complicated is it really depends on where the business operates. I have clients all over the world. So for me, if I have to get on a call at 11 o'clock at night to talk to somebody in China, then that works into my schedule. Well, that's not true with everybody in my law firm. I think everybody's got different clients and where they may be. And so I think a lot of it has to do is where do you have to communicate? Which international boundaries are you dealing with? And I think that's going to have an important aspect with this. I don't see laws like this coming to the United States. I mean, it's possible, but of course, here's the reality. If this turns out well in France, it may well impact the United States government to say maybe we ought to consider this. But there are also some academic scholars who are very skeptical because what they're concerned about is the productivity of individuals may be impacted if all of a sudden at 5 o'clock in the evening they're offline and they don't come back online till 8 the next day for the very reason I indicated earlier. That is, if their best time to work is 11 at night until 3 in the morning and they can't communicate with anybody in their business, that doesn't sound like that's a good solution for those folks that work at those hours.
There are differences between the French and the American work culture. The French enjoy a somewhat shorter work week than workers here in the U.S. Also, perhaps, a few more coffee breaks during the day, too. More importantly, however, experts tell us that the French have more of a focus on managing a favorable work-life balance. We asked Peter Vogel if U.S. companies consider at all the impact that after-hours communication has on work-life balance.
Well, I think in the U.S. there is kind of an expectation that everybody work 24/7, and that's kind of our culture. I see it to be that way, and I think it's kind of unusual. Of course, there's probably an age issue as well. The millennials, I think, maybe have a different perspective on this than baby boomers. And so part of it may be age-related, where someone is in the pecking order of business. In other words, I think newer employees may feel the duty to have to work 24 hours a day, where someone who's more senior and closer to retirement goes, I'm working 9 to 5 and that's it. So everybody's a little different about where they happen to be and why they want to communicate. I have some friends that are in their 70s and 80s and are working full time. So retirement has a different meaning. And I think the social communication is if you have people that are in their 70s and 80s now and they don't use cell phones, they don't send emails, they don't send text messages, they probably couldn't care less. But I think as we have more individuals, as I say, millennials and X-Gens, then I think that those folks are going to continue to drive this to be at a pretty good pace.
Attorney Peter Vogel has a wealth of experience dealing with a host of international clients. He advises them on issues such as cybersecurity and identity protection, international privacy laws and global technology disputes. He also counsels clients when they are upgrading IT platforms. We asked Vogel if he could provide an example of a personal experience where being aware of time zones, holidays, and local customs came into play when dealing with his international clients.
I had a client who was implementing an ERP system, and they had a kind of a major disaster, and we needed to talk. So the CFO sent me an email and said, call me. Of course, he was in Frankfurt, Germany at the time, and I'm in Dallas, Texas. So I called him, and he sent me back an email immediately. He said, no, I mean like 9 o'clock in the morning at your time. You didn't need to call me in the middle of the night. And I wrote back and I said, I'm working. I was awake. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. But he wouldn't talk to me until 9. So he thought he was imposing on me when in fact he was not. And so I think when you're operating with a business in another part of the globe, that's very, very important that you pay attention to their business. I have a client, a large medical practice, and they have been using doctors in Australia to read the x-rays. So I negotiated this contract, and one of the reasons for that is when they're doing the work in Australia, it's 12 hours later, and so there's a complete flip, but it makes it almost impossible to make phone calls to ask questions because of the 12-hour difference. I have maybe one other thought, and that is one of the real problems in expecting people to work 24/7 is the fact that they also maybe don't think through what they're responding to. And so there's a trade-off on people that are in the middle of the night waking up and seeing the phone on their phone that they got an email. As a matter of fact, I got an email from one of my partners at 4:11 in the morning the other day, and I know he doesn't get up early in the morning, so I sent him a message to say, why are you up and what is this about? And he kind of laughingly said, I just got up to get some water. And so, but he could have been working too. And then we have some cases going on in which we needed to talk about. And I was prepared to talk about it. But I don't think people really think about the fact that people really need rest. They need to get away from emails and text messages. And it is important to have a downtime. Otherwise, I think it's not healthy.
Companies such as the German automotive giant Daimler AG are relying on technology to help them with the right to disconnect law. The firm has an optional email feature called Mail on Holiday. We asked Peter Vogel what he thought about the concept.
Yeah, I think that email on holiday is an interesting idea, and it's one that actually we use. I mean, I know that, as a matter of fact, I sent an email this morning and it bounced back because somebody was out until the 20th of the month. Well, I know that. That doesn't mean I won't hear back from them, but if you have that automatic reply that comes out, that's very helpful. But I think there are a lot of businesses that have expectations that employees will use that and use it properly. Personally, I think it's a good idea because then you don't have an expectation that that person's going to be around. But doing it at night hours, so you're offline at night, is not quite the same. Being gone for a week because you're in meetings in another part of the world and you will not have access to email, that probably makes sense. But I don't know of any laws, obviously, on the books or in preparation in the United States that would address that.
Communicating with employees, clients, and partners is one of the most critical tasks we do in business today. As noted in today's report, if there is a mistake or miscalculation made, the differences in culture, language, and yes, even the time of day can negatively impact communication and ultimately organizational performance. And while it's true that technology has yielded many tools and solutions to aid global business, organizations must still have an awareness and respect for the cultural mores of their colleagues around the world to ensure business success. We asked Peter Vogel to share best practices and policies in regard to business communication here in the U.S. and around the world.
Well, I find it difficult to come up with one simple direction, and I think a lot of it has to do with what is the company's business activities. If they are operating in one country or one state in the United States is a lot different than if they're doing business around the world and their customers are all over the world. And I think that what I have found probably the most useful way is to say to the employees, if this is intruding on you, that is to have to be available for conference calls at 11 o'clock every night to have, speak to somebody in China, well, then we're going to compensate you another way. You don't have to come in until 12 noon tomorrow. You don't have to work in the morning. And I think there are businesses that are more attuned to doing things like that, where they're more sensitive to, if you're going to force somebody to work late hours, that they give them a different time. Now, that's kind of really, in a way, the basis of the Chicago police lawsuit, and that is there has been an expectation in Chicago that a police officer is on duty 24/7. Well, that's not really very realistic, because if nothing else, police are entitled to sleep and be with their families. And so it really depends on the business, I think, and what their obligations are to their customers or to their community.
As we conclude our interview with Peter Vogel, he leaves us with a final thought on how he manages his business-related electronic communication.
Well, I think that we're at a point in time with the change of use of communications, text messages and emails. We live in a very dense information age, and it's only going to get more complicated. I don't know how many emails I get every day. I like to think it's less than 1,000, but sometimes it feels like 1,000 or more. And I know I'm not alone with that. And between that and text messages, it never stops. I mean, I'm on airplane mode right now, and I'm thankful, but once I turn off airplane mode, I'm going to be bombarded by emails that have been coming in during the interview. And I think everybody lives in that kind of era. Actually, one of the nicest things I get to do is when I'm in an airplane, I don't get bombarded because I turn off my device. And so I think people have to kind of come to grips with, how do you live with this bombardment of emails and text messages? And if it becomes a social problem, then people will go to their governments and expect orders and rules to be put in place so that there may be laws that would be helpful to them. I don't see that necessarily on the horizon, but it could happen.
Well, that concludes our report, Introduction to France's Right to Disconnect Law. We'd like to thank Peter Vogel of the Dallas-based law firm Gardner Wynn Sewell for sharing his time and expertise with us today. I'm Michael Quinlan, and thanks for watching.